Yeah,
I
I
think
just
the
don't.
main cut from old lists is like we get rid of the Key Guardian in this format for sure. I haven't been playing
Yeah, I just
that
updated it
anytime
because we
soon,
haven't
but
played this deck a lot. I cut the Key Guardian for a deny.
Yeah, I think that's good.
yeah, I was gonna say deny. Yeah, I went to 2 deny day 1. We had the old list up here. I think me and Anton both did, yeah, and Concussive Palm as well are both great.
Yeah.
Yeah, not much to be said. Yeah, I see.
Same old
3.
Heimer, as we said earlier, and it is just kind of the if
Right,
you can
it
drop
speaks for
Heimer and you can
itself.
protect him, you win the game pretty much. It's really hard to lose from that standpoint. The whole deck is just based
And
on
there was an
dropping that
interesting
guy.
point that was brought up with Nick Makes Plays. It's like, oh, you just play Heimerdinger with protection. Now that's like this. Everybody and their mother knows to do that. There was definitely a time where people did not know to do that, and it took
Oh yeah,
players. Even now, we see it all the time where it's like they don't have
they'll run it out
real
at the wrong
protection.
time.
They
It's like,
play
oh,
pseudo protection. That's the other
right,
thing, is
it's like,
understanding when he's actually
oh,
100%
I have a Spirit Trap to
invincible
use.
and
This
when he's
card's
not.
living every time. Or like,
Right.
it's like you need a lot of ways to protect Heimer. But before, people were just like, turn 5, I'm playing Heimerdinger, and then I have 6 mana next turn. It's like, well, no, your Heimerdinger dies, and that's when you lose.
Right.
Wasn't always
A
common
lot of
knowledge.
understanding of like knowing like when you can just accept the death of your Heimerdinger. That's
Now
like,
running out
there's
one
a
when you
lot
have
of-
the second one, sure.
Yeah, the
When you
thing is
have
that there are
protection,
certainly
then
draws
you
when
got
it's
the
like you
second.
can't lose. Like there's
Right.
certain hands with Heimer of just like if you just draw like more than one Heimerdinger, several Flash of Brilliance, the solitary Monk, like you can't lose. Even
And that's
in
what the deck
games where
feels
you
like right
everything
now.
is against you, like you can't really lose.
Right.
So our S tier actually has 5 decks this week, which is a lot, and it feels like I think Heimer is still the best out of all of them.
For sure.
Or I think maybe it's like a 1-2 because they're very opposites. I think that the Harrowing Noxus deck is like a 0.1, and then the other one's just 0. Like they're very close, 1A 1B if you will. And this is just another S tier deck, STF. We started playing this deck recently, and it really took me by surprise how good it is, honestly. I really didn't think that much of this deck, other than I saw a lot of the people in high NA Master playing it a lot. What do you guys think about this deck?
Well, 2 warning shot over 1 warning shot and 1 parlay is definitely where I was at.
Yeah,
I've
I
seen
think I took
a bunch
this
of
deck
different
this
number
recently.
variations across a lot of different players. Like some people prefer parlay over warning shot over parlay, a mix, even more copies than 2, and they're playing less of the static shocks and things like that. But like overall, I really like this deck. I think it has a lot of game versus a lot of the other aggro decks, as well as Heimerdinger, and then has a very, very strong late game strategy so that even against the decks like Braum and Anivia, where they have enough control to just stop all of your early game aggression and probably have enough life to like, I believe they're favored in that matchup. It's just that you still have a game plan. Even in matchups that are bad, you have like a very realistic game plan to win the game against them. And because Ezreal is just so strong. And it's kind of crazy to see a deck like this where like Ezreal is in the deck, but it is not the intended victory strategy. Like Ezreal is just there to be Ezreal when like just to finish if they're not dead already. Like Riptide Rex,
Right, just another facet of the game.
Especially with like how aggressive the deck is and like how strong like Pilfered, Goods, Black Market Merchant, Euro Grift are gonna be in certain matchups of just like they'll just win on their own. Like a lot of in like the early game cards can just win on their own. And
Oh right, it has a strong
Yeah.
curve.
Yeah, definitely. Just that's the most surprising part of the deck is that they just jammed all these triple Chem Punk, triple Butcher, and then the Petty Officer buff, and it's just like, oh, this deck can just throw a lot of damage at you very quickly and then just burn you out by the end of it. And then Riptide Rex on the top. Someone did mention Swim's playing Pool Shark over the Butcher. Not a fan of the Pool Shark, A, because you have to play the card that you get right away. And secondly, because if your opponent goes, say you're playing the Mirror, your opponent starts Jagged Butcher and you start that. They now get to trade up on your guy, and their Jagged Butcher still gets to trade with the Chem Punk. Not
there's
good.
a lot of
Don't
matchups.
play
Yeah,
that
a
card.
1-2 is
Right,
really, you need that trading power.
Yeah, you need the 2/2.
It's only really good in like the late game, right? Like
right.
Right. The other one's good if you're trying to
anytime
pop
past
off with
like
like
turn
TF
4
or
or something, yes, it's a better
Yeah.
card, but I just don't see it. So I do
The
want to make the
2/2 is
adjustment though.
way
What do you
better.
think? 2 warning shots or 2 parlay in this deck?
I think it is the 2 warning shot. We
it
were
seems
trying
like the
parlay
warning
version,
shot is,
but-
especially in this version with all these yoink cards, you want to be playing the activators, or else you could just have a brick hand.
I do like Parlay. I just don't think there's space for it.
I
I wish
agree.
there was, because I do think that card is very good in this deck. It's just that all of the other options I think are slightly better. And the Warning Shot is just, it's so good, having the consistency to trigger all of your plunder cards for 0 on curve, burst speed, not giving them like there's just all like so much that card does for this deck. And then even in the late game, like for Riptide, Rex, and Ezreal as well, there's a lot of use.
And a deck that just now we're on to Braum and Anivia. Just some people call it Bald Eagle. I think Bald Eagle, we have this version here too. This is more of like the Mav EU version with like the Omen Hawks and more of this. I don't know if they tailored their deck differently since last week, but this is the version that I know that when Mav first made the deck, this is the deck I was talking about. But we made our own version that's more about the not only the mirror match, but just more value cards in general. Nick,
Cut
is
the one
your
drops.
version? Yeah, the one drops are out.
Yeah, this is Anton's version, and then I played like so I wasn't playing Box and Avalanche. I still feel like the Avalanche is just all you need, but like I was thinking about teching like maybe even like
I
one
like
box.
the box
but,
right
I
now.
like,
really do like the box.
I'm like,
As
I go
somebody
back
who
to, like-
hates, I hate the box in theory, but I think it's
That's
very
insane.
good right now.
I never thought I would hear those words come out of Matt's
Yeah, I know.
I like the
Chad,
box
this is like
right
I said,
now.
I like
Matt likes
candy or something.
And it's the fucking box. Holy
Yeah, I
moly.
know, it's-
Yes.
I think me and Anton were in agreement though that like I hate the one drops.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
like
I really
hate
don't
that
like
they
the
just
one
never
drops.
do
They're so
anything
low
for
value.
you, like outside of very fringe scenarios where like it just helps you stall like a little bit, and like
Yeah,
I
your
immediately went
glimpses
to
are gonna get
2.
played.
If
Your glimpses are
Rear
gonna
Guard
get
came
played.
back into vogue, then I could say yes. But right now, even the one drops, it doesn't block the spider, and yeah, it does block the 2/1, but that's the only card it blocks right now.
Right. Maybe if, again, looking at, and even then I really don't believe so because this deck just runs Withering Well and the box. But like maybe in the format where everyone's running the 3/1, you can think about bringing that card back. But I just feel like Vile Feast and Whale and Avalanche is just enough versus the lots of one health guys that you're kind of chilling.
Yeah, I'm still playing 2 at the moment. I'm still playing 2 Hapless Aristocrat, but it feels like a necessary evil. It's a card that I almost always hate seeing, but there are some times where it just saves you in the early game a little bit to like curve up. But a lot of times against the more aggressive decks, like as long as you see the Braum and a card that you can play before turn 4, and it pretty much doesn't even matter what card that is. If it's just any remotely playable card, Sentry, Tavern Keeper, the Vile Feast, sometimes Avalanche, like just anything before your Braum, you usually win those games. Like a lot of the more aggressive decks right now, of like you play Braum and like that's enough. And against the overwhelmed deck, a lot of times it comes more down to like, okay, you need to see the Braum, and then the second requirement is like see a Ruination several turns down the road just to make sure that you answer their Harrowing. Those seem to be the 2 most important
and
things.
there's a
Any
ton of this deck on ladder, so you're going to be playing the mirror match a lot, much
Right.
to probably your displeasure, but I just want
I
to
think
give...
I have also cut that missed call for a 3rd box in my current list, but that was just really hedging against the mirror.
Yeah, this is definitely a flex spot if you're watching this video or if you're listening to this stream right now.
Could also
The
be
missed call
another
is definitely
Fury
a flex spot. It could be a lot of
Yeah.
different cards.
Box, another
In
Avalanche.
fact, I might even just put another Fury in right now. I think Fury might be
Yeah.
a better card.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm not.
Fury-
I think
a fan of
Fury's
this
pretty
call, but-
insane.
The missed call in the mirror though is definitely
Right, it's just
net.
a value card, but
Yeah,
a Fury in the mirror match is good
Looking
too.
at was Fury in the mirror is definitely good.
Oh, so many times you win games too with Fury in this deck in several ways.
Right,
Of like
save
either
your
pushing for
egg,
damage, and, like
overwhelm.
Fury on Braum is like that's always the GG against the aggro decks. A lot of the time is like they
Yeah,
find a way to kill
yeah.
your Braum, then they don't, and then the game is over. Like,
Yeah, block the 6/4 with the Fury.
It's one of
Right,
the
so
ways
a
you don't
big
feel like you get
component
trampled
of this
by that
deck is going to be identifying what cards you need in the mulligan, because obviously this deck can be slow. It's very slow, in fact. So you have to identify what you want, and people always ask us like how to beat the mirror match. One, it starts with Anivia. You need this card in the mirror match. And then the second cards you'll need are going to be Rekindler and Harrowing. You just need those huge value plays. And then a combo you want to hold on to in the mirror match is Ruination Box. Ruination Box is dirty. And before
or
when we
Ruination
were-
Avalanche. And you need
Yes.
some combination of the
right,
white
Avalanche
board
is not the
and
preferred
decks.
version, because if you have your own
Right.
board, you'll be killing your own Anivias, and that's a problem we faced a lot when we were facing mirror matches without Box. Box with Ruination in the mirror match means that my eggs are living and yours die. So you better have an answer to that.
The other one is if you can assemble 4 Anivias on the board, which I know it's like, okay, 4 Anivias, it seems like a lot,
Right.
but like in the mirror match, the game drags on for a while.
It goes
And if
on.
you can
Definitely
try to
happens.
play more proactively towards dumping the Anivias into your pool for the Harrowing to have 4, once you have 4 Anivias, 8 damage, the first 6 clears the Anivias, and the final 2 damage will kill all of the eggs. So that's a very straightforward win condition of like if it happens, but there's sometimes where players have the ability to move towards that situation and they don't, or they overextend too hard when their opponent can Ruination Avalanche and they haven't committed like any of their own Anivias to the board at that point, and you're overcommitting your Anivias. You have no Harrowing in your hand or like something like that, and you're just blowing all of them into the board. So understanding when you can kind of play into that and when you can't, and then holding your own responses for when your opponent does, and kind of understanding the clock as well, in the late game of who's at what life, how many Anivia swings am I going to need to actually get in and kill my opponent.
Yeah, some
Level
nice
of
tricks,
Braum.
chat, also
another
that you may not realize you can do. And some players, hopefully, you do know this, but being able to, you can stack your fast spells on top of slow spells. So if you need to do maybe 3 to the board, you can play an Avalanche and stack Whale on top, or play an Avalanche and stack Box on top. And then you can deal 3 to the board or 5 to the board, respectively. And 5 to the board is quite insane. When you can do that, you pretty much are clearing everything. But yeah, just good to know that if you do really need to address a board before it's able to swing, and you want to do packets of 3, specifically like to say maybe Heimer, things like that, like Avalanche, stack Whale on top is pretty good.
Can also beat the mirror match by stacking on top of Anivia, which is another thing, which you were going to have to wait for your opponent to block. That's another one. You can't do it right away, but you can swing with all of your Anivias. Your Anivia goes onto the stack, and then they go to take their blocks. And then in response to your own Anivia on the stack, you vengeance their Anivia, or you're able to like grasp their Anivia off the board, depending on what health it's at, and things like that to set up for the Agnivias to die through your Anivias.
If it's 3, if it's 3 Anivia triggers, for instance, and you have a Whale, you can throw the Whale out so that you're doing 1, 2 plus the Whale, which clears all his 5 health Anivias, and then the final one clears all the eggs.
So it's mostly just a macro understanding of just Anivia versus Anivia. That's like the whole match. Get as many copies of that card as possible, and then set up for ways to clear through full Anivias and eggs.
You can definitely expect that deck to be on ladder. Here's a deck that's
hall pass now.
Okay. So we're gonna talk about Ez Karma while he's in the laboratory. A deck that, unlike Braum Anivia that we saw a ton of last week, I think Karma Ezreal is going to make a huge comeback, and we've already seen it influenced by tournament format a lot, but now it's just like good in constructed and ladder format, because when Anivia is played and these very slow plotting control decks, that's when Ez Karma just is like, well, these are free wins, I'm winning every time. And yeah, this is a pretty standard list. I would say a big change is you need Deny right now, because we live in this heavy Shadow Isles world with these very impactful spells. You need to Deny.
Edit this right now. I don't think Key Guardian belongs in this deck anymore. There's so many different ways to build this deck, though. So take whatever we say about specific things with a grain of salt in terms of card choices.
See the
Karma, because like there's a million different ways to build it with like small marginal win rate improvements and decreases depending on like certain matchups and what's more popular for the day. But I like more concussive bombs in this deck right now because of the amount of Noxus that's going around. I feel like it helps you a lot against that deck, as well as even a second copy of Deny is very strong.
So what do you think? 2 Deny or 2 concussive bomb? I put in the Deny off the top of my head, but maybe you just need 1 with this access to like deep.
I think it's you cut a gotcha for a concussive bomb. I think the gotcha doesn't do enough anymore.
Yeah, I think that gotcha is pretty bad in this format. I forgot who I took this deck list from. So if we're gonna cut both gotcha, do you just put it in and get excited in a concussive palm?
I think you can keep 1 and just put in a 3rd concussive bomb here and call it a day on that.
We know how I feel about 1.
I also do feel like Claws of the Dragon is pretty solid in this deck. I would say that it's better than Gotcha. It's just a better way to deal 3 damage.
But it is this deck is always really tight on space. General.
I don't think Get Excited is actually that good this format. Hot take.
Right. I don't think a lot of people are people playing Get Excited right now in the decks?
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe some amount.
I mean,
they're
there's
still
so many
playing it for
differing
sure.
lists, but my philosophy on it right now is it's mostly being used as a counter queue, and the decks that it beats, it just outright crushes, like for the most part. And then the better tech choices are mostly to tech out against your worst matchups, because the matchup that you're beating of Braum and Anivia is like you're just beating them way more often than you're like the win rate is very, very high against
Right.
that. So I feel like it's better to tech out for the matchups where you are less favored, and I feel like the gotcha and get excited right now are both really mediocre, just because in the aggro matchups, like they're really not killing that much. It's way too easy for them to just stop those cards. That's why I'm a big fan of like triple concussive bomb right now, and even the Claws of the Dragon, because I think Claws of the Dragon is just a much better way to deal 3 damage to cards on the board, and can potentially even just be like blocking damage, or blocking damage earlier, even when they're not trading, and blocking damage against like the overwhelm cards as well. Like
I think
don't
the
like
key. I think I want to say Eye of the Dragon is just the key to winning that matchup, and I don't care about the
sure,
claws.
it's a big one, but like I just think that the reason to be playing cards like Gotcha is just for the early game board control, and I think that Claws just does a better job than that right now. I
Right.
think and Get Excited is a lot more about it's like the versatility of like the end game reach, and again the mid game board control. The mid game board control is again, I think Claws is often just doing a better job than that card, and the late game potential to burn your opponent I don't think matters really this format as much. I think it could help you in the mirror. Like I'd probably want to still play one of the card just to sit in my hand.
What do you want to
like,
change? Do you want to cut a Get Excited and a Gotcha and play 2?
and yeah, probably 2 Claws of the Dragon.
I really feel that card is strongest
I
at 3.
think I want to be playing 2 Get Excited.
I don't think you're really improving.
I think there is a very good point that Get Excited in your matchups probably isn't helping a lot right now.
There's a lot of games where I know that I've just definitely been able, my opponent's just been able to hit me 3 times with the Shadow Assassin, and then, or wait, no, 4 times, right? Gets like 2, he gets 8 off me, and then he's just able to double bomb me with the Karma, and then he doesn't even need Ezreal. That's just like 12 is a lot, and that deck will fish out all the cards it wants every time.
I think that's like a snare that's few and far between. Of like, there are games where like you don't answer the Shadow Assassin, it hits for 1 million, and then like you can just burn them out with Karma. Like I'm a fan of like still maybe keeping the 1 copy in, but like it just seems it doesn't. I don't think it's it's very, very good this format. It just I think the decks you're beating, you're just beating. Like Braum and Anivia, I think you're just winning. Like you get to that stage of the game and it's usually just over.
In general, I do like burn cards, so I would have to think about this deck. Obviously, we haven't played it a lot this format, so I can't really say what is the best version of this deck. I don't I forgot if I took this deck, that particular list that we start with from Lobster or from somebody
I like the
else.
way this looks right now, what we're looking at. I can get behind this. This seems pretty solid.
Yeah, I like the way this works. I would probably like to play, like I said before, I like playing Claws of the Dragon, even though I hate this card in general. I think I want to play 3 of it probably. And I also want to play a Key Guardian when you're playing Claws. I really like that combination.
I do like that combination of cards. I'm not sure what else to cut though. Like
yeah,
I
could, like I said, the space is so tight.
Yeah.
I think some of the lists I've seen just play like 2 statics as well.
Ooh, I can't get behind that. I think Static Shock with Ezreal, that's a package deal. I guess it's not so important in the TF version, but in this version, it's an Ezreal deck.
Right, with Karma +1 though, that's 4 targets. You usually are able to just get there by the end of it. I'm just only approaching it from the perspective of typically a control player though. But like the cards that I definitely don't like seeing are like Static Shock. I don't really care about because I'm not giving him targets for it really. Like as the Anivia deck, right? Like I'm not really giving this guy a lot of Static Shock targets. And I just feel like Get Excited is probably more value in certain matchups, and just sometimes stopping the 3 is good for me. But 3 is definitely not. I mean, I agree. It is kind of
right. It's like Ezreal. It's peanut butter and jelly. Ezreal and Static Shock. It's just
right.
But no, I agree. Of like, it's a very low value card. It feels like in terms of actually controlling the board and sustainability.
Right, but just like what it does for Ezreal is invaluable.
Yeah. It's also insane in the Heimer matchup.
And then our last S tier deck, a deck that we just talked about with Nick Mix plays a ton, is this Harrowing aggro deck. I actually took his deck card for card because I like these Legion rear guards. I agree with people that yes, if I could always hit a 1-drop on 1, it would never be Legion rear guard. Therefore, I shouldn't play it. However, there's a lot of hands where you don't hit a 1-drop. You don't have a Legion Saboteur or a Precious Pet. Therefore, I really want to hit a 1-drop because I want to play into this deck's best features, which is aggro. I want to be playing guys and doing damage. But just in general,
only 2 transfusion in the list.
That is the only thing that stands out to me as like.
So transfusion is a card that I've always really
with all the
disliked.
1 health guys.
Not only that, it's just like a very situational card, and yes, it is ultra nut with Crimson Disciple, and even when you don't have Crimson Disciple, it can be really good just as a combat trick.
Rider.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that. But I think the difference would probably be like you could cut a Decimate and play a Transfusion, but I love Decimate. I think Decimate Noxus is a 3 of.
Yeah.
It's just like that is 4 damage on 1 card is
the only card I've ever considered playing over the 3rd Decimate, and it would just really be meta dependent on how grindy the format is. If I was taking out a Decimate, I would be putting in a Pharaon for 3 more Decimates and an 8/8. Like that's the only way that I'd be taking out a like that.
I don't think in the Harrowing deck, but I like it in a lot of other Noxus decks.
Yeah, I like it in
like Swain and Harrowing.
Yeah, bringing back an 8/8 Overwhelm is still like good, and it's just like top in. Like I said, it would have to be a much grindier format. In the current format, you definitely aren't playing that.
So last week we started with a deck that was like 2 Draven, 2 Darius, and 2, or as us cultured people would say, Darius, us learned scholars like BBG and I, and 2 Elise. But the more I thought about it, it's like Elise is good, but this deck has really good access to 2-drops. Therefore, Elise felt less important to me. And Darius is such an important card to be playing on 6 as just like this huge 10-6 guy who ends the game. And then it makes if they do have answers, obviously this deck looks so great, and just like, and then you just see the Harrowing. The Harrowing does something that was not intended for this deck at all. I really don't think Harrowing was intended to be played in a deck like this, and that's why they're going to change it back, because it was not meant to be like this. Excuse me, last time we saw Harrowing, it was in decks like Spooky Karma or Ashe Thresh as like a game ender in a like mid-range or a value deck. Now it's like, oh, this card is cheap enough to just play in my aggro deck to supplement losing my board. And it adds a layer of inevitability with cards like Legion Grenadier or Overwhelm units. And when a strategy against this deck is like, oh, I'm clearing the board, I'm gonna, run this deck out of cards, and when a card like Harrowing exists that plays so well into that, that's what makes this deck, in my opinion, just like either the best or the second best deck in the game, because it just like this card fills every hole this deck has and does it so well.
Yes, it is. It very much goes completely against what we were talking about earlier of how aggro decks generally are, and why this deck is kind of a problem of just like aggro decks are supposed to eventually run out of resources once you've controlled them down, and then the game is over. If you're within burn range, that's like the only possibility of you really losing. But this deck is like, you play the whole game trading on their board, killing off all their guys, taking a little bit of damage over time, but you survive to the end, and then they just go Harrowing and you die. And you're like, well, the worst case scenario for Harrowing generally is you go Harrowing, they play Ruination, and then you brought back Grenadiers, so then they still end up taking damage. So the absolute worst case scenario for this card is you and your opponent trading all of your mana, and then you still coming out on top on damage. So that's like, it's way too good in a deck like this.
Booney asks, 2 or 3 Harrowing Bass can be a brick, but I feel like you needed to see it to be Bald Eagle. The list we brought last time was playing an Atrocity, but I do think that now with the emergence of the Anivia deck, you should be playing 3 of this card just to maximum see it. It does just win you the game, as Nick said. It's literally turn 6, I win the game. Like, maybe turn 7.
Right, if anything went wrong in the game, if your opponent was playing a strong control deck, it's like, nope, that's all good. I'm playing Harrowing. You died.
Yeah, cool. You don't
so
have
in the case of Deny, I was gonna say, cool. Yeah, it's like the Ionia decks that are being played right now that you can deny Harrowing with all get steamrolled by the early game Noxus cards. So it's like, yes, Deny is very good against Harrowing, but a lot of times like those decks are already dead.
Yeah, when this deck first emerged, the deck that I was farming it with was Spooky for sure, because Spooky just lets you, as Nick McFlay said earlier, just lets you not lose the game, and the aggro decks really can't deal with all of your heal, especially in the Spooky decks. We have we have Eye of the Dragon, we have Health Pots, we have Will of Ionias, and we have Deny for their Harrowing. you already play the Shadow Isles control and you have the deny. It's the only deck that you can do that with. The problem is Spooky just like has a really bad matchup against everything else, namely Ezreal. And as there's multiple S tier Ezreal decks, so you just can't play Spooky in this format.
Yeah, Spooky is just, it's not what it ain't what it used to be, to say the least.
I
So
feel like
our
it's mostly because we have like Ezreal in the format.
so our A tier has a ton of decks that use that Noxus Burn package. So I wanted to start by a with a deck that used Noxus but not in that way, just to get it out of the way so there's more of a consistency when talking about the other decks of Noxus. And this is a Braum Swain deck. I forgot who started playing this. It might have been Control, but I'm not entirely sure. And
I think it was Rattling Bones. I'm not.
is it Rattling Bones?
I
Well,
think
I'm
it might
sorry
be
to. I don't want to give.
I don't know.
false,
It could have been a lot of people, but
Right. It
whoever
could've been a
made
lot.
this deck.
Someone
props.
definitely started climbing master with it, and then a lot of
It
people
got
started
to-
playing
I
it. I
think
know a lot
somebody-
of people saw BBG highlighted throughout the week.
Was it
yes.
BBG?
I do know that Rattling Bones definitely played it before BBG did. I know
Yes,
that
for sure.
for sure. Yeah.
Let me go to
But
just
you know that
decks
he was
of
playing.
Runeterra,
He
because
was
I
just
know
playing
that.
it to a lot of
Okay, why
success
is this?
recently.
Why is it doing that? There we go. Somebody got one with it or two with it, and that's where I took the deck list from.
Spooky can't deal with
WL.
Nox.
Oh, what's the guy's? I never know how to say his name now that he changed it. Before it was like Prodigy
4LW.
4LW.
or LW.
LOR.
Yeah, that was his deck that
Okay.
that he got posted.
There we go.
So that is the gentleman who
Yeah.
got the achievement. Just so we
Definitely
don't
a very
have.
strong deck.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think this deck plays really well into certain strategies by trying to be like a better mid-range deck, but also hedging that by having like good burn potential and then strong units and strong removal. What do you guys think
Right.
about this deck? I love the 3 Culling Strike. I love Culling Strike in this. I love
My
Culling
favorite
Strike
thing
for a
about
long
Really
time.
good this format.
For a long time, we especially since Bilgewater, Culling Strike just kills like almost every single good champion right now very
Yeah.
efficiently.
3 mana remove Braum. 3 mana remove Ezreal.
Right, kill
3 mana remove
Heimer,
Draven, Heimer,
you killed Swain.
MF,
Yeah, just every
Lucian,
Anivia.
you just kill
Swain,
you kill
a 5-drop.
everything with Culling
Right.
Strike.
Anivia
Like,
and
drop.
Anivia.
Yes, and
MF. Like
Right.
Tia.
Right.
Just
The list goes
the list
on.
goes on. Yeah.
For
Yeah,
sure,
and
this
then
card, this card's great right now.
it's
It
just
seems
a
like
really
it has so
solid
much
deck.
game against the aggro decks of just like a really solid mid-range deck that can play the aggressor at any stage of the game for the most part. Definitely it just has the tools to be countering the majority of the aggressive strategies here and then ending the game in a reasonable time, even against the Harrowing deck before, they might be able to Harrowing. And like the Arachnoid Sentries do so much for you, the Culling Strike. I think that might be one of the decks that it could struggle against a little bit depending on where they see their Harrowing. But in terms of how the curves line up, like you're definitely going to do a great job of just answering a lot of things up the curve. Braum especially, like there's so many ways to deal with aggro, and then against the slower decks, you have all the burn cards. So like it does exactly what mid-range wants to do. It has enough of an aggressive line to run at a fast enough pace to kill the control decks, has a little bit of top end as great finishers, Leviathan, Swain, just really able to close out games. Then the Noxian Fervor and even like Death's Hand, Demolitionist, Disciple, like all the burn cards. And then we have all these great removal cards to answer all of the great combo potential out of those decks. Like as you were just saying of like, Heimerdinger, Ezreal, like killing off all of these essential pieces for these decks. So like it's just so well rounded. It seems to just have a great kit against a lot of decks.
Spoonie said
like
Flock is busted. I agree. Flock is an insanely valuable card. We've said before, actually, there is only one card right now, chat. One card that deals 4. That card. And that is huge. Like being able to play when your opponent plays a 6/4 and you're able to play Arachnoid Sentry and kill it for 1 mana, pretty great.
Pretty solid. For sure. Or even play like an Avalanche that turn, and then like you might kill off some other crap on their board, and then just Ravenous Flock it.
Right.
Like,
Right, to
The
kill
best
the
part
thing
that
that
it
you
doesn't,
actually
yeah, the
wanted to
best part
kill.
is that it doesn't even have to, right? It doesn't even have to be stunned. Just having it's taken 1 damage at some point this game. Now I just have a deal 4 spell for 1 is really just such a powerful swing in this current format. And just
Especially
deal
decks
4.
that revolve around particular units, it's very hard to keep a unit that you really want safe when it's like, oh, I could always just stun it or damage it, and then it's never safe.
Right.
And then before we get into the Noxus decks, I just want to talk about the 2 elusive decks that we put in our A tier. I know a lot of the swim guys out there are definitely going to be unhappy that their Lord and Savior's deck, nothing like it, because I think his deck is terrible, but also that it's in our A tier as opposed to our S tier. And I think that reason is that yes, elusives are very annoying. However, there's not the same level of inevitability with this deck as opposed to a burn deck or the harrowing aggro deck. A lot of the most popular strategies, number one, play elusive units so you can block these things, but also cards like Withering Wail are really good against this deck, and there's not the combat tricks that are readily available as opposed to the harrowing or just like Noxus decks in general. So it doesn't play out the same way. I feel a lot more confident against a deck like this.
Right.
Yeah, I do feel the burn version is far superior to it. Just like I think you have a much better chance to end games with burn than you do being able to attack through.
Right. I like the burn version being able to just it does what Noxus is already doing right now, but hey, you also get to play Deny and Will to just fuck over everything else. So, and it gives you those Ionia outs to like the Anivia deck, whereas the other burn deck's just gonna shit the bed most of the times, unless they get the harrowing and you can't runation them. Then sure, they can get there sometimes, but I think that the Noxus elusive deck just has the ability to actually make plays, which is what's really good about it. Plus, just picking up the Demolitionist, a card that Nick Makes Plays identified earlier, is just a big problem card. Like actually being able to just pick up those cards consistently is pretty insane. Picking up
Where's my elusive burn?
Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. I was gonna say Fear of the North is definitely a strong consideration for that deck, depending on what you're seeing on ladder. But a lot of the times, I feel like having the Elixir of Iron Protector Zed at a cheap cost is like a lot of times where you need to protect your cards is in the early game. It's a lot more crucial to defend a card on turn 2 or turn 3 than it is to defend on like turn 5, 6, moving forward. Because when the Green Glade duo goes unanswered on turn 2 or the Zed goes unanswered on turn 3, it's often just far more relevant than anything that happens later on in the game. And you can only play so many Freljord cards. If you weren't playing like a Kinku Wayfinder variant or something like that, and you just had more space, but like that card is way too powerful not to play. So you have to play Omen Hawk, and then a lot of times Elixir of Iron is better. Because he may be playing like 2 Elixir and 1 Fury, but more often than not, I think the Elixir is going to be better.
Yeah, I think that's what who was playing it earlier today. Every time I've queued into Rattling Bones, I think lately he has been playing.
He puts this deck in his repertoire for sure.
He's been playing that deck a lot.
This deck plays a 1 of Retreat. I guess that's fine. I'm not gonna play with this deck too much, as in terms of like changing the deck list. I just realized that I didn't.
Retreat's pretty insane in that list. If there's gonna be any Retreat deck, it should be this one.
So this is gonna be the first deck that we see that transitions into this. We're gonna see this in like the next 4 decks for A tier that just all play the same shell of Saboteur, Pet, Disciple, Transfusion, Fervor, Decimate, and Demolitionist, Grenadier. Just like that damage potential is too able to be like, oh, let me just add this and put something together, and now it's broken. So like we see this similarly with this elusive shell is the same way. It's not synergistic enough to be like, oh, you can only play that in the elusive deck. You can just take these cards out and put them in other strategies, and hopefully, and that's what happens, and that's one of the downfalls of having dual region, and just when you can mix regions and colors from different games. If you can mix different archetypes and intended strategies together, you just get left with like, oh, let me just take the best parts from 2 different things and put them together, and it becomes very unfun with a deck like Elusive Burn. But yeah, this deck very solid deck for grinding on ladder. I don't know if I'd ever bring it to a tournament strategy, but I do think this is a very strong deck.
Sure. Very strong on ladder right now.
This is the best way to connect units to the face, and this is the best way to deal face damage after the fact, and that's exactly how the burn aggro decks excel in every card game. Is always just early game connect units in the easiest way possible, and then finish them off with burn, and that deck does both of those better than it is exactly the best of both worlds.
Right. And just if you're gonna be playing an elusive deck, I'd rather be playing this than the Freljord in the current format, just because
For
I
sure.
get access to the
Yeah, really,
Noble
I'm
Ionia
not
deny.
really a big fan of the Frey Elusives. I think it's good. It's the out of the two for me to personally play, I probably play the Kinko Elusives more. However, I think in terms of just like the better deck, I think the Burn deck is better.
Right. I think it just has more lines too. Like I said, the amount of times that you can pick up demolition
Right, just
to just
burn.
get there.
Burn
Yeah,
in
I
general
think
just
it
gives you
depends
more outs.
a lot also of what you're seeing on ladder, because I think against a lot of the Shadow Isles decks,
Holy
the Ionia one does a bit better, just
Right.
because of having
Deny.
access to Deny and Will of Ionia,
You also play the disciplines, or I guess you're playing disciplines.
as well as
both with
I was gonna
Shadow,
say the
yeah.
the chunkier units is the other part of
Yeah.
that, of like having the elixir, the Omen Hawks. It's not even just the more Will and more Deny, because you can still find denies into the Noxus Burn or Noxus Elusive deck. It's just that there are more copies of the other one, as well as just more ways to buff health onto your units and making your boards a lot more resilient. So
Right.
So our
So,
next deck, that this was the first deck that made it to Master by 4LW. Am I saying it right now? 4LW?
yeah,
Okay,
Yes.
there we go. Got it. But yes, very similar deck to all these other Noxus decks. The difference being that it tries to supplement otherwise no champions or weaker champions with MF, who is really good in aggressive strategies. It just so the way that aggressive strategies get countered the best is from your opponent's units, and then particularly like cheap chump blockers that we would call them, stuff like Aristocrat and Misfortune's like, no, I'm gonna keep my board and do some damage, and you could even think of it like she's healing your guys at the same time because they're not taking combat damage, and therefore you have a more resilient board with a card like MF. And then the Gangplank just gives you a little extra reach because he generally comes out when he's leveled up because you're doing so much damage before turn 5, so he comes out as a 6/6 with a really strong effect, and he gets the keg. Overwhelm in Noxus is really synergistic. That inevitable damage is very important. And this deck is a little different than most of the Noxus decks in that it actually plays a draw card in Zap Sprayfin, which is a nice elusive to be having, so it kind of combines a little bit of the aspects of the elusive burn deck by having a Zap Sprayfin with also just like a little bit of the draw, but not, I wouldn't say it's like a major facet of the deck by any means. But yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about this deck. It's just a very strong Noxus deck that is a option if you're considering aggro decks.
yeah. I mean, it's I like a lot of what that deck is doing, of just very solid units and very good ways to push face damage. I don't think it's my I do feel like the Harrowing version is just the best version of Noxus to be playing right now, but like of what you said, of just core Noxus cards, good cards that complement them. They all of the different variations of Noxus seem to match up against a given deck a little bit stronger or a little bit worse. But yeah, it's definitely.
I do like that deck into other Noxus decks sometimes, right? Because the MF just gives you the
Right,
you
just
can't
the
block
high
with any of
value
your one
card.
health things. Like I'm getting so much damage in here, or I'm just wrecking your board state, and then you cannot come back because I have fatter units than you.
MF, Make It Rain, and GP. GP is like the pseudo Darius,
Yep.
for sure.
just that
Like
top
how
end.
it works with that deck, and it
Yeah.
is very strong in that deck. And then also, I mean, Make It Rain against a lot of the more aggressive decks is just so strong sometimes. Gets face damage in, and then also clears blockers off the board. Like Grenadier in the aggro mirrors is just a blocker more than it is an attacker. 9 times out of 10. It's like you play that card and you block their attacker because it's the only card that you can block with that doesn't get better value on your own turn. Almost every card in the Noxus decks are like, they're better attacking, even versus themselves. Like cards like Precious Pet and, things like that. So like that card is just
Yeah,
so
I
good.
definitely see a lot of people attack with their
Shutting
Grenadiers when they shouldn't quite often in this game. Like just
Right, when it
keep
just
that
trades into a
card back
1/1,
on your
that
board. If
trade
it's-
generally does always exist.
Right.
You don't have to feel pressured to do it.
You're getting that too any point in the game. That guy, once you invested that, you're getting that too, chat. You do not need to swing with this card if they have something to block it with. That card can be triggered with a Noxian Fervor later in the game. You can use it for a transfusion. Much more things. You can just, as Nick said, you could block a 2/3. Being able to block Disciple and just trade on it and ping them for 2 and not take damage, great. Oh, do
One,
not
one of the
attack with
few
that card.
cards that stops that card from attacking.
Yes.
It's like that and use Cast Salesman. That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else in the decks, and use Cast Salesman isn't even in every variation of Noxus. It's just this deck specifically, but in several Noxus decks, just being able to use the Grenadier to counter the Disciple.
Yeah, this guy's just a nice construct that stays on the board. You know that your opponent's basically 2 less by him being there, and if you do manage to clear the board, maybe you can get a swing with him. But overall, this card is just there to trigger your fervors and just sit there and deal 2 at some point, or come back with the harrowing and deal a lot if you get a good bit of him in the pool.
Yeah, and this is the last of these Noxus decks in the A tier at least that is going to go over, and this is going to be incredibly brief because there's not been, ever since we started doing this podcast, there has not been 1 week where we left Teemo Burn off, or just like this general deck.
It's not tilt over.
Right. This deck is just, you can never underestimate this deck. It is still probably the most efficient burn deck that's existing in the game right now. It is so good at just doing pure damage. Like, yes, I think that the Harrowing deck is a better aggro deck, but in terms of just like doing damage to the Nexus, this deck is the king.
Right.
Definitely.
It's all about like like I said before, there's all these different Noxus variants. How does each one line up with what you're seeing on ladder at a given moment? And this deck versus the Braum Anivia deck, it's not gotten it. That you cannot rely solely on the damage. You need to be able to have that harrowing reach as the top end. That's definitely going, like they do very similar things across the board, but you actually have some game against the Braum Anivia deck, even though you're not favored. Just because of the harrowing and the giant overwhelm units, you can still win against that deck. It's definitely
in a world where everyone's playing Heimer, though.
Right. Then this deck is definitely the best version to be playing against that. Maybe even the Bilgewater one. It's like between that and this one, just the
because the MF they
I
can't
was
really block with all the turrets.
I was gonna say, well, also like the Make It Rain too, and some of things. Probably this. Honestly, it's like hard to say. It's between those two. It kind of depends on like what the other decks around it are. I think if it was like I'm just running, I pick a deck and run it against Heimer, I would imagine this one has the highest win rate of all of them. Just the pure amount of burn. So
yeah, so just to make this, I guess, because like we talk about this deck every week, let's talk about, because Static Shock is one of the weakest cards. I don't even want to say it is the weakest card in the deck.
It is the weakest card.
What is like something that you would consider changing the Static Shock for in this current format?
Is it third bomb? Just go more face?
Yeah, I was gonna say third get excited, or I do think that the I still think that the Investigator is a pretty interesting card in this deck. The 4 mana 3/2 every time you play a 2-drop. I do
like that card.
A fleeting card. I think that card gives you a lot of game against
the
worst matchups. But
so what do you think? Just to change it up a little bit this week, do you think 2 insightful investigators worth a try for the?
I kind of feel like Static Shock's still just better in terms of consistency, but I think that card has a lot of potential.
I think I want to play 1 Static Shock and 1 Get Excited.
Yeah.
I like that line much better than playing.
The way you put it was just like, if I had to pick a card, I'm like, what's the next card that I might want to introduce into this deck? That's certainly one of them.
Yeah. Third Monkey Bomb. This is a Monkey Bomb stream, y'all know.
And then our last deck, and rounding out the A tier, is going to be our famous Ledros Control. It was an S last week, and I still stand by that. But this week, it feels less, especially against the Harrowing deck. It's just like this deck, it has answers, but they're few. Like Thermo Beam is good, Dead Bloom Wanderer is good. The rest is like, well, I'm investing multiple cards now.
Yeah, it's like outside of our curve of Thermogenic Beam, Dead Bloom Wanderer, and Vi, you just don't have great ways to deal once those units hit 4 health. That's where it really starts to struggle. And Basilisk Rider just being that much damage and at 4 HP, it really is putting this deck out. And then the other thing too is that against all of those burn and aggro decks, it's like once you put them out of resources, and as we were saying, why the Harrowing deck is so strong right now, they're done. They just have to rely on burning you out of the game. You have a bit of healing in this deck, so you can heal yourself out of that. And just survive long enough, and then it's game over. But then it's like, if they play the Harrowing, you have to have the Ruination or you lose. And that it's very, very hard sometimes, of like you're burning too many resources into dealing with Basilisk Rider and Darius efficiently, outside of like, once they play the Darius, you can have the Vengeance, and they play the Basilisk Crowd, you get the Thermogenic Beam, but it's like we have very specific responses to these cards that they are generally more easily playing than we are, because we have to burn our Thermogenic Beam earlier in the game a lot of the time to make sure that the early game units are not just sitting around. So then we're kind of left with like Vengeance towards those turns, or like maybe stringing cards together. So
Right.
Vi
And
as
then,
well.
we have like quite a few B tier decks on our list
There's
this week,
so
so I'm
many
just going to
B-tiers in this
I'm just
format.
going to identify a few. And the first one, because this deck just popped up recently, is Deep. I know that Please Don't Hack Me used this particular list to get to rank 1, and usually you would say like, oh, that must be a pretty good deck. I really just don't think this deck is. I don't think this is a well-rounded.
This is definitely the some tweaks that I made, because I believe that the version he was playing the 2-drop that makes a 1 cost.
Oh, you're right. He's playing Coral
spell.
Creature.
He was playing 2 Coral Creatures. I played 2 Atrocities over those, because I don't think he was playing any Atrocities in the list or anything.
I think it's very good at what it's trying to do. I feel like in a vacuum, it does feel like closer to like bottom A tier, B tier deck, but like for what the attempt was of just like farm Braum Anivia, it feels like it's at like an S tier deck level.
Yeah, in
like,
that case, you just wouldn't play the
counter queue.
Atrocity though.
This deck can queue into anything that's not Heimer and feel pretty strong. Like
Right.
you do have a good amount of the problem is definitely the Harrowing deck, though. If you can somehow like turbo deep a Devourer and eat the Darius, you're sitting pretty. But yeah,
I think your favorite
it's a
against the
solid
deck
deck.
is just that the Harrowing deck is like, it has the high roll potential against anything. There's not really a deck that it can't high roll, given us specific scenarios or just draws. But like it feels good against the aggro decks. It feels good against Braum and Anivia. It definitely struggles probably versus Es Karma and definitely Heimerdinger. But like I think a big part of it is that like people have been moving away from the Heimerdinger decks on ladder, even though it is incredibly powerful, because there's just so many Noxus decks.
Right.
And even the Braum Anivia deck.
The Ezreal decks.
Yeah. Braum Anivia, and then like people are playing like Es Karma to counter that. So like I mean the Ionia decks definitely have game against that, and he clearly built the deck to be more aggressive, to have more game against those. Should be like auto beating or favored against the other decks, so then just make your deck built a little more around beating your worst matchups. I think was the intention. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm guessing that's where it was. So I think it was good call for a given day on the ladder. But
yeah, a deck you can definitely have in your repertoire.
It might be closer. It might honestly be closer to A tier, even if it's lower A tier.
Yeah, I can definitely.
And then another B tier deck I wanted to highlight quickly is MF Lucian, just the only Demacia deck we have in our list, and we talk about Demacia all the time. This deck is just always there's gonna be a good Bannerman deck for ladder always, because this deck, especially with the current LP system and just like the way that ladder works, where you just have to win more than you lose, MF Lucian Bannerman is just like, this is a great deck to just be consistently winning 55-60% of your games and grinding. It's a grind deck, because there are games that you're gonna flat out lose and you can't change that, and there's a lot of games where you win quickly. So this is just like, this deck always is going to be one of the first decks to hit master with, one of the first decks to like just be climbing really fast with in general. So definitely a deck you should have at least like in your like I said, in your repertoire, in your select decks that you queue with. Just always want to have a Bannerman deck because it's really good.
Yeah, the fact that this deck can play its turn 3 plays into the Bannerman are so insane. That Petty Officer health buff is just really, really strong into the Bannerman. Just Petty Officer in general, being able to make 2 things on 3 and then play Bannerman, like, you can afford to miss a little more curve with this list. Plus MF is just insane versus any other board-based deck, as we've said.
And then the last B tier deck I wanted to identify here is Ashe Thresh, and the reason I want to do this is our friend Nola Gold, he streams, I'm sure you guys have watched him, he plays in Tournament all the time, he's a pretty well-known player. This is what he played to get to master with. Not this exact deck, but the idea is that he wanted to try and beat Harrowing, the other Harrowing deck, the good deck, the Noxus one. But I really like Rhymefang Wolf right now, because I think cards like the 6/4 don't have answers. However, Rhymefang Wolf can kill any unit very efficiently, so I really like that. Also, just I think that the Harrowing,
that Brittle Steel cries to this 4 health.
Yeah, but
you have a lot of other good ways to deal with it.
Right,
you
have Icedale Archer, you have Ashe, you have even Heart. You play hard copies of Harsh Winds in this deck as opposed
Right.
to the Anivia deck. But yeah, there's a lot of value in here. Obviously, against like Braum and Anivia, this deck is gonna cry because they play better, more valuable cards. But I think this deck is a well-positioned later mid-range deck in the format.
Yep, I played this deck a lot in season 1 or closed beta. Yeah, in closed beta, I tried this deck out a lot. It definitely wasn't, you know, like an S tier deck by any means, but like it was something that I just enjoyed playing a lot. I liked the style of the deck, and it was a lot of fun to play, and like very good when aggro was very popular on the ladder on a given day. And I think that's what it's very good for here. Exactly what Matt was saying of like against the Noxus Harrowing deck, it's just very, very strong. It all forms of aggro though. Pretty much any form of aggro this deck is very good at beating, but a lot of the control decks often just have like just better ways to win the game than you just playing a Harrowing with a bunch of Ashes. And even though you do have a lot of Rekindler value and there are ways to still win the game, you have to work for it a lot more. And sometimes they can simply just beat you where, like, if you Harrowing in the Anivia deck and you get Ruinated, they need something on top of that. In this deck, you play Harrowing, you get Ruinated, that's it. Like, it's
Right.
your board's just gone. You're not winning the game that turn. So you have to be very careful about how you run into Ruination and playing around it, and developing board states that are threatening enough for your opponent to Ruinate before you go in on a Harrowing. But definitely a very
Holy shit!
solid
They're going
deck.
ham with the fire.